I have always been fascinated with the psychology of design. Even as a child, I was very aware of how my environment affected how I felt mentally, emotionally, and physically. And as a result, I was constantly rearranging furniture and playing with lighting, colors, and textures based on my current mood or season. In hindsight, and from my current level of awareness, I can see how I was using elements of my physical environment to manipulate and move energy. So, fast forward to university, and I decided to study psychology and history. And during that time, I found the evolution of architecture particularly fascinating. So when I decided to make a hard left turn out of university, I don't think anyone was surprised that I decided to study interior design, which then led to me spending a decade working in construction and development with a focus on hospitality and healthcare. And even as I left construction and moved into the legal and financial realms, the intentionality behind how something is imagined, designed, and then constructed is the same. So whether you are swinging a hammer or putting pen to paper, the how and why of design always communicates our intrinsic values and levels of awareness. There is a reason schools, hospitals, and prisons look the same. Now, if we focus specifically on education and schools, physical classrooms have remained relatively unchanged for over a century. Chalkboards have become smartboards, and while student-teacher ratios may have increased, curriculum is still largely informed by politics and administered based on age, not learning style, interests, or aptitudes. And Pavlovian bells dictate movement and flow, and much of the day is spent contained and controlled inside of a box. Even much of what we consider to be alternative schooling still adheres to the structure and design of the education system. As a genuinely curious woman who has always loved learning, I struggled in school, despite achieving relatively high grades with what felt like little effort. And it was rarely ever the work, but the environment and the people that stimulated and challenged me in all of the wrong ways. From teachers who preferred the comfort and consistency of conformity over autonomy, to curriculum that failed to engage or challenge me the majority of the time, to social pressures that were being created and manipulated by mainstream programming in the Department of Education, to buildings with harmful lighting, poor air quality, and uninspired design. Like none of it ever sat well or made sense to me. But it took university, a diverse corporate career path, and a global pandemic for me to really dive into and unlayer the indoctrination and separation of self that occurred in my formative years to truly understand what it means to be guided, mentored, and to learn, which is why I'm thrilled to introduce you to Stephanie Alvarez, founder of Holos Academe. Stephanie's reason for being is to change the existing way we approach childhood education by disassembling the existing philosophies of education. And she does this through creating and sharing a new model of education that will guide children to discover their divine purpose. And she believes that all of her lives and experiences within this life have prepared her for this moment. Holos offers a holistic education for youth that is based on a new model of guidance. And as we stand in accountability together, being the custodians for the next generations, the way in which we support our children's exploration of the world in a secure and trusting environment that encourages expansion into one's talents and natural proclivities is essential. For this holistic approach to work, we have to shift out of believing that our children lack something that they have to get at a school, and rather transition into an approach that cultivates their innate abilities so that their gifts of mastery can emerge into this world. For the next hour, Stephanie, her daughter Samara, who is 8 months old at the time of this recording, and I sit down for a conversation and dig into our own personal experiences within traditional education systems, how it led to the creation of Holos and the vision being held for future generations. Even though I am not yet a parent and have not had to experience the education system from that perspective, it is something that I'm deeply passionate about, because in reflecting on my own experiences, I believe that when we know better, we have the opportunity and the obligation to do better. And when I see something being created that would have served little Nicole, I get so passionate and lit up and excited about what future little Nicoles have the ability to experience. Which is why, as soon as I met Stephanie, I knew I needed to introduce her to you. If you want to learn more about Holos Academe, you can visit their website, holosacademe.com, where you can join their Telegram group, or you can find them on Instagram at Holos Academe, and that's HOLOSACADEME. As always, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the Grand Rising Experience wherever you are listening, or you can head to grandrisingexperience.substack.com. It truly helps ensure that these valuable stories find those who need to hear them. You can also subscribe at www.nicoleconnor.com to learn more about my portal membership and all upcoming summits that you can attend both virtually or in person. Thank you so much for being here. I love you. Let's dive in. I really enjoyed our conversation, which was completely unexpected because Christine just happened to invite me on at the last moment. So I was very excited to just learn about what you're building and what you're creating, because it's so desperately needed. And your approach to education and the paradigm shift that you're creating within it is really, really important. Like, it's so important right now.
Yeah, thank you. And it's one of those projects that, like, I always knew that I wanted to work in holistic education. I just never, and it wasn't until a few years ago the clarity came that I'm here to. Why did I never fit into the old system? Why did I have so many problems with it? And it's like, well, when you do, it's because you're here to create something else. And I think that was a really big piece to accept at first. I was just hoping, I think at the beginning, for someone else to create it, and I'll just be part of this amazing project. That's kind of always how I saw it unwinding for myself. And but the more work I did on myself, the more self-study I did, more it just kept revealing itself to me. And so here we are. I'm building it, and the more that I do, more it just continues to unlock. And I think that's been also a really amazing piece to it. And so, yeah, at first I just thought, okay, so I'm going to build something holistic, something I don't see in the schools. But now, as we go into new earth, and so much is available to us as we make that transition, as we raise our frequency, as we let go of the old, more becomes available. And I'm like realizing that the school is just more than also just holistic. It's like a redefinition of what holism is, what holistic education is. And there's this incorporation of spirit that has not been really talked about or looked at in education before. But if that is who we are, as not like in our natural state of spirit, then that it's like it's a no, like it has to be part of holistic education. And so now it's looking at how to support that from the earliest years. Really, I was thinking it had to be school, like kindergarten, but it's like, no, this is the curriculum of life. It's happening from the very beginning, before a mother even is looking to conceive. There's already that connection with the being who's coming in. So this education or this self-study is happening just way earlier than I even anticipated. Yeah. So that's what I mean. It's just constantly expanding.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
beautiful. And it's interesting because I was actually looking at a video before we came on, and it was of a woman giving birth. And it's like that beautiful birth spiral that happens as the baby is kind of exiting the womb. And now you're talking about the epigenetics of education as well, and what that looks like. And we're seeing that emerge through the birthing communities as well, as women are reclaiming what it means to um, create and sustain life. So that education is starting earlier and earlier and earlier. And I love to hear that you are dovetailing it in to what you're looking to create as well, because it is this holistic synthesis of who we are. And it starts, like you said, beyond the womb. It starts through the DNA and the RNA imprinting that we as women carry inside of our womb and inside of the eggs. And we are ultimately responsible for the future generations, not just our children, but our children's children and their children. And it's just so big. And I love that you're also talking about bringing back the spiritual aspect of it, because there are spiritual schools, like they do exist. We've heard of like the Shambhala schools and the Montessori schools. And I feel from what I've read about Holos Academe and in our previous conversation, you're really getting more into the soul work, which to me feels like it's another layer deeper than just looking at the spiritual constructs that we've been taught up until this point as well.
Yeah, that's really important. You said that because it goes beyond the spiritual constructs. It's like we can read about spirituality in a book and make a lesson on it and include it in a school, but it's another piece to work with people who are aware of their own spiritual connection, feel completely responsible and accountable for the work they do to maintain that connection, and then to use that connection to anchor down their mastery at this time in order to do their work. So it's this just, I see it as like another level of awareness, and I don't see it as like something we could have done before or shouldn't have, or it's not like, it's more of what's available to us right now because of the time that we live in. So something very specific for this time. And I see it because we are in a time of creating a whole new earth. So the evolution of earth, let's say this next version in the last thousands of years, we've chosen to be here to anchor down this information that's going to be there for thousands of years and perhaps seed future evolutions, so it's a huge responsibility, but I know that we all chose to be here because we knew we have what it takes, and we just have to take action now. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We're at that point now. It's like as soon as you begin to see the divinity in yourself, you see it in all things, and you really do understand that this unity consciousness that we often hear about, once you truly start to embody it, it begins to make sense, like that inner knowing locks. But it's also, you really do have to sit in separation in order to understand unity. Like we have to go through the duality, and we
Yeah.
have to go through like that squeeze of the birth canal in order to really truly understand what it means to see God in all things, and find that kind of soul reconnection. And it's interesting because, like you said, we're anchoring in something new. So it's, you can't just throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, and disregard the systems that we have, in the sense that it's bad and we have to fully reject it, because then we lose the lesson inside of it. And we have to be able to learn what didn't work and what needs to evolve and what needs to grow out of those paradigms. And I know you have experience working inside of the system, but you were also a student inside of the system as well. So what was it like for you as a child in school? What was your experience?
So yeah, my experience in the school system, there's so much that came from that. It's so interesting now looking back with new lens and seeing why that happened, why I designed that to be part of my life. It all, comes together really nicely. But at the time, I was in school here in kindergarten, and I had seems to be like a regular school experience. When I turned 6, so when you enter grade 1 for 3 years, my parents decided to move to South America, to Ecuador. And in that time, I was put into a schooling system that was so archaic. It was like the traditional French system, but brought to South America. And it was such a change for someone who's 6 and full of, I had like a lot of light and just super happy kid, and was already part of a more progressive education system here at the time. Going into something like that was quite shocking. Looking back, I can say it was probably traumatic, but at the time you kind of just roll with the punches. Like that's what it felt like. And so the school that I was put in, it was, separate desks, all based on memorization. We had tons of exams, and I was 6. So going into a school that was uniform, high discipline, super strict, like, we had exams. My mom would wake me up sometimes at 5:30 in the morning to study for exams. During exam periods, we had 2 exam periods a year, I think, not more. And it was tough. And the thing is, the social cultural belief at that time was that you have to get good grades for you to be considered a good kid. So even I started to get conditioned at that age that unless you have good grades, you're not going to be loved or appreciated or accepted. And it was so woven in just our culture. So even though my parents had lived here, they themselves had gone to school there. So even that started to come out of them again because it was familiar. And I went to school. That's how I would say, first 3 years of school was. And then when we came back to Toronto, because I had gone through such strict schooling, I had memorized, my multiplication. Like I had all my facts and figures memorized. So I was always ahead in math because of that here. But because of that, I just felt that I was now attached to this validation of getting good grades. And so I started to like the fact that I was really good at math or getting good grades, and that stuck with me. And it was like a driving force for me all the way through high school. Like I wanted to get good grades because that means that I would get something out of it, whether it was my parents recognizing me, or now I see a lot of it was associated with love. But that just became this program that I was running on throughout the whole time. That's just my dynamic with family. And then now at school, I mean, that's a whole different thing. You have teachers who are amazing and you remember them. And I remember how special they made school because they didn't follow what school was. And that's what I loved about them. They kind of broke the rules a little bit. They're a rebellious teacher, but they connected with us and understood us. And I really liked that. So I could see how amazing it is for, certain teachers to be in the system now, kind of offering that, for some children. It's really important. And then at the same time, I had teachers who they're also turned off. They're not motivated. They don't want to be there. It's just a job for them. And so you kind of just go on autopilot in those classes because if they don't care, why do you care? And it's all, it's not even conscious all the time. But overall, I did always feel, whether it was here or there, just this need, that you need to get good grades in order to succeed. There is already a path laid out for you that you must follow. You go, you finish school, you get good grades, go to university, get a good job. Having a good job means you'll be able to pay the bills and you'll be happy. So like that's kind of the story you get sold when you're little, and you get sold this by, your parents and your teachers, and you're looking up to adults for advice because you're a kid and you haven't lived in the real world yet. So you have this inner knowingness that something doesn't feel right, or this feels awkward, or why are they already so miserable? How can that be? Life's not supposed to feel this way, but then you think, but all the adults are saying it, so it kind of has to be true. And you start to throw your own knowingness out the window at that point. You're like, okay, I'll trust the adults. But then when was it? I think I was maybe in my late high school years going into university, where I realized like, this is not, like, I can't keep going with this anymore. Like it just doesn't make any sense anymore. And you kind of look back, you're like, what have I done? But that's when I started to make changes. So I always consider that time a really painful time because you wake up from the story and you realize it's just a story. It's not real. And you have to look at it. You have to look at all of the lies, I guess. It's also an amazing transformative time too, because now you're like, I'm free. Look at all the things I can do.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. I absolutely relate to that. I really struggled inside of public education. It's because I was considered like an early learner. So I went into school already knowing how to read and write. And I was a highly intelligent child, which created problems inside of a very prescribed and linear system. And the solution was always to maybe move her ahead grades. But my parents didn't want to do that because of social issues that could come up by having me with children that were significantly older than me. So then the solution became, well, we'll just give her more advanced work. And all that did was just delay um, the issues that I was having because I just could not be, I guess, stimulated enough. And it was funny, before we came on the call, I had this memory of a poster that was in my grade 4 classroom, and it was a picture of Garfield. And he has like books that are circulating around him. And it just says, I learn by osmosis. And I've never forgotten that
Oh,
poster, which is really funny because I've learned throughout my life that I'm not like incredibly studious. I definitely take in information passively and energetically. And that's how I learn. And a lot of people will say, well, how do you know that, Nicole? I'm like, I don't know. So there's like this inner knowing that I have combined with just what I'm always picking up, the inputs in my environment. And that's how I learn. And that's incredibly difficult inside of a square box and the traditional education system. And more children that are coming, that are being born into this like activated time, need that energetic support as well inside of how they learn. And like you said, we're not going through education, it's life. We're learning life skills now at this point, and we're not following that linear and prescribed path. You have to go through public education, and then you go to university, and then maybe you do even more post-secondary, and then you go on to a very linear career. University was incredibly confronting for me, because I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to go there in the first place. It never felt right, but it felt like that's what I was supposed to do. And I think there's a lot of teenagers that are coming up against that now, also wondering what's the value of investing in post-secondary when there's no guarantee of like employment on the other side. A lot of those frameworks just haven't caught up with how we're now living in this new earth as it's coming about. So for you, with this new system that you're building, what is the contrast to kind of what we've both just described in our experiences inside of traditional education?
yeah. Well, one of the big ones, and it came up with, as I was explaining to you, I realized why it's so important, is this harmony that exists in the home environment and in the school environment. And I see families, well, let's look at the old system first. You know, if you have a system that is really rewarding on grades and success, let's say, and at home they're doing the same, they actually are working in harmony together. So you kind of are going both environments and you realize the expectation is the same. So it's not confusing. What I'm seeing now, though, as we shift, is you have parents who have still, and admittedly so, they still have those programs of the old, of what the school system is. And that's ingrained in them. And yet, because they recognize that might not be what the children need, they are making a really brave, courageous choice to put them in an alternative school, let's say, just looking at that, at an umbrella of alternative school outside the school system. And in doing so, now a child might be in a space where they can explore things freely. They are, not learning school or how to do school, but learning about themselves and maybe perhaps learning at their own pace. Like there's so many great things about alternative school. And however, in that space, it might be conflicting with what is believed at home. And so if a home environment and a school environment are not working in harmony, it can be damaging to a child. It can be disorienting, because that's why it becomes damaging, because they don't understand who they should believe. It becomes a trust issue as well. When you have one environment saying one thing, doing one thing, and then, they're like, who's telling me the truth? Why is it this way? And so one of the pieces that we've incorporated through Holos is having the Guidasium as a platform that is a necessary, like you opt in when you register as parents and you register your children, you opt into being part of the guidesium. And the guidesium is guiding as I am. And so recognizing that you are a spirit, recognizing that you are not all those programs and you can leave those all behind. You just have to get willing to take that first step. And so we offer workshops based on metaphysic universal laws, let's say, about this current time, and how to slowly start implementing them in your life so you can start expanding. Because the children, if they're in an expansive space, like the one we offer here, where they can really explore themselves deeply, they're going to expand at such a rapid pace that if they're not supported at home through that expansion, or if they have ceilings at home due to beliefs, that can harm their growth, right? So it's bringing that awareness now to families that it's never been more important for you to do that work. And that's why I can see that as when you look out now, you see so many people working on healing, working on themselves. It's because it's just this natural process of where we're at right now. It's for these kids. Everything we're doing now is for these kids. I don't know if I'm rambling on about something else, but I just see that everything we do is for the next generations. We have to expand in order to offer them an expansive space that they're being born into, because they're going to expand much more rapidly because they're here to create.
What I like about your guidesium model too is that you're also reinforcing the necessary knowing that children are our mirrors as well, right? They really show us who we are and where we are at and how we show up in relationship with the world, because not only are they of us, they are always constantly reflecting the world back to us, and they don't have the layers of programming yet that we've received. So they're such a pure soul that can really reflect back like that divine essence that we need to see in ourselves. And like you said, we create the conditioning and put the ceilings and create the containers around the curiosity of children, which is what we're all trying to get back to through this healing journey, is being able to find ways to be self-led and curious and find our joy and our purpose and our passion outside of what we've been conditioned to believe we are. And a big part of the teachings that I've done over the past few years is when you don't know who you are, the world will tell you and you will get put in that box. And so what I love with what you're doing is at a very young age, you're instilling the ability for children to, like you said, trust themselves. And when you trust yourselves, you're not seeking that external validation, and you're not necessarily following into those codependent patterns that seek to put you in a box and tell you who you are.
Yes. One of the big things when we talk about new models of education, it's really releasing all the containment. And you start to see the traditional system had a lot of containers. You contain children according to their age, prescribed age per grade, what they should be taught each week, each month, how in the day it should all be structured. Like everything is a container. And I get it. When you put so many children in one teacher, there has to be this high level of structure in order for that person to remain the authority figure. But then that's all we keep enforcing is this authority figure. I mean, there's this really great book by John Gatto. It's called Dumbing Us Down. And I was introduced to this from a teacher, a colleague in the last two years ago. And it's just changed also how I view it's something I already knew about the school system, but it was great to see that being put in a book for like many to know, and for you to because it just really clarifies what the system was made for.
Yeah, like I look at the system too. It really is some of the earliest interventions systemically that has contributed to the destruction of the nuclear family and community as well, because what we've done is we've outsourced the knowledge and the wisdom of family and community to the government. We've taken it out of the home and we've put it into someone else's hands. And one of the reasons we've been able to do that also has to do with how we silo our lives around this is how we work and this is how we live and this is how we make an income. And all conditioning, but the conditioning had to a certain extent start in the school. So it's kind of like this chicken or the egg theory, it's like, where did we first learn this? And I mean, it goes back millennia. I mean, this is a deeply ingrained slave archetype that we have, that we are now being called out of, which is so beautiful. And so many people are coming online right now and truly understanding that. And the last 3 years was a huge squeeze for that, when people were thrown into physical isolation and physical quarantine. All it did was highlight the internal quarantine that we've already been in, which I think is the most beautiful byproduct of the pandemic, is the amount of people that have just come online with the level of awareness that's required to bring this new earth into physical manifestation, because it's here. It's just waiting for us to show up and claim it. We have to bring it in. We have to pull it in, and bring it down and anchor it into our created realities. And it does happen on an individual basis. And it's going to be this symbiotic relationship between how we bring our children into the world and how we birth them into being, and then also how we choose to evolve to be able to support that new way of being as well.
Someone shared with me, actually, was my partner. He said, New Earth's already been created. You're here to now form it. And you've already done it. There's a future version of ourselves that's already done it. So we're looking back now. The path's been laid. You just need to walk it, and that takes action. And it was such a great conversation, because it was like, yeah, you just got to walk. You just got to take the step. It'll form as you take each step forward in alignment. So that's what came up, was this piece of it's not just taking steps, or I think what's changing from old earth, this being awake in old earth versus being awake in new earth, is that it was a lot about just going with the flow before, letting things come to you, this law of attraction. I sense there was flow, trust what is, and that kind of thing. And now I find that it's asking us to be, and these are not my words, I'm part of a spiritual community that shares this, and it's hitting so true as I live this path now, is from flow to fluidity. And it's you being fluid. Think of yourself as a moving current, and there's going to be, the rocks or the, pieces in the way, and you just need to be quick, ninja quick, and navigate around those. But you keep moving, not waiting for things to come, but you keep moving.
Absolutely. Something I talk a lot about is kind of the harmonization that's happening too, of the feminine and the masculine, and that as women, we're really being, and the men too, but we're really being called into our feminine essence, which is that formless, kind of uncontained essence that allows us to make the unknown known. And as we heal that and settle into that, we're also pulling in the healing of the masculine, which is the doing. So we're kind of moving, like you said, from the flow, the being, into the doing, which is going to allow us to go back into the being. It's kind of a do-be-do circle that we always end up in. And it's so incredibly important right now that we just move into right alignment and right action. Because I think so many people have beautiful ideas, and there's still just that fear and that programming that is preventing them from anchoring it in. For the children that are going to be coming through your program, and who are being given the tools to understand that B2B almost right out of the gate, that's a game changer. The next generations that come through are going to be so powerful, and not because that power is being granted external of them, but because it's coming from their heart space. It's coming from this divine connection that they're being tapped into, or not even tapped into, that they're not being disconnected from.
That's it. They come with this beautiful connection. And how do we support them in anchoring information from when they're little, so that it's a process of remembering, anchoring what's already within you, rather than seeking outside. So what prevents us from being, with a capital B, is this connection. and also going through a stage of seeking outside of ourselves and looking outside of ourselves. And so if we can guide the children, we first have to do that work to realize we don't need to seek outside in order to guide, and model it to the children. But essentially that's what we do as guides, is we recognize that we take really high level responsibility and accountability for our own self-work and self-study so that we can model authentically to them what that is, and that they have the freedom to look within at their pace, from a very early age. So as to already, is it decode what's already within them? It's already there. They're already whole as they are. It's amazing. I was working with a child this past spring, and he loves Lego. Oh my gosh, he just wants to build Lego all day. And there's part of me, like there's still those threads of the old that's like, I should get him to look at a letter at least, he's in kindergarten, but he really loves Lego. And there's this piece of me felt guilty, like having him play Lego all day. And I'm like, oh my gosh, and I would still introduce other things to him, but he chose, I don't want to do that. It doesn't interest me. And it's not that he was not doing anything constructive with the Lego. He was always creating amazing structures and really into it, like really getting something from it. So for me, it just became about providing him tools, morning circle, closing circle. We did a lot of sharing. He loved to share. So that his thing was, I want to do show and share. I love show and share. If he didn't have that moment in the day, he was really upset because he loves to bring in aspects of himself. And I thought that's so beautiful. They just want to share aspects of themselves. Why don't we have to keep opening these kind of activities up more? And more space. So sometimes we take 30 minutes to an hour so that everybody could do their show and share well. Throughout those 4 months that we were working together, his mom told me in the end of the school, she said, he has developmentally progressed so much with you in these 4 months. I just want to thank you. And it was both just a relief and kind of what? Because I said, there was this part of me that felt guilty for not working so much on the academic part, but then I have to follow what I preach. And for us, it's about following their readiness, following their lead, but also challenging them. So when I saw that he was really good at Lego, okay, can you make this? I'd give him challenges with the Lego. Can you construct something that could house all these cars? He loved playing with cars. Can you make a garage that would have this many levels or whatever? And so he would start to do that. And then she said, he's starting to count up to this number and he's learning how to tally. And I never taught him that. And I was like, yeah, no, I haven't taught him that either. That's really interesting. So there's certain things that that was the first example and a powerful example of, if you work on their expansion, they're going to be able to pick up maybe what you explained about yourself energetically, what's around them, or hear what's around them rather than necessarily have to do it out of a book. And that's what I saw. I saw this incredible just advancement, I would say, in him. And it's just acquisition of skills. You don't necessarily have to sit down and do the skills. So it comes more organically.
Yeah, I think that's what happened with myself as a child. Is I was in primary, so I'd have been 5 years old. My parents were being called in for meetings and the teachers were like, do you know that she can read? And they're like, no. And they're like, she can't just read, but she's reading at a grade 3 level. And my parents were like, what? And, they read to me every night. And they just thought when I was reading back to them, it's because I had memorized the story. I knew what was coming. They didn't know that I actually had a reading and comprehension level that far exceeded what anyone knew, that I could go pick up a strange book and be able to read it. Wow. And again, it's not because anyone intentionally sat down and taught me how to do it. It was through observation and through being in an environment that was just conducive to learning. I was always surrounded by educational materials. I was surrounded by books and crafts, and books on tape were huge for me. Cassette tape, because I'm an 80s baby. But, it's just, I was just in an environment that was conducive to learning. I also loved being outside, and I was very curious about how things worked and how things were constructed and the natural environment that I was in. And I was always asking questions. So it's that natural curiosity. And I often say children are known for saying why, and how we answer their why appears long into adulthood. The general impressions that get left on them with how we choose to answer and respond to their curiosity really shapes who they become over time. And it's also where we see children getting suppressed around feeling heard and feeling seen, which is why I love that you're doing these share circles.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you just even spoke about with yourself, I mean, the way that we approach that is like, that's your mastery coming through, that the fact that you're 5 years old and reading and writing or comprehending already like at a grade 3 level just shows that there's something there that's showing up from, past lives, future lives coming now, whatever it is. It's this mastery with words and its connection with words. And that's what opens up. So as a guide, we observe that. And we would say, okay, like, how do we explore this further with her? How do we challenge her, or help her reach her unknowns in this area? So it's kind of looking at, we all, if we've lived millions of lives, then we also have many familiarities within those lives of what we're able to do and carry out in terms of our skills. But if we are evolving as spirit, then how do we go and see where our limit is, and how do we start taking a step into that unknown space, so that we are expanding our own spiritual evolution? And so that's where we go with the children, is we're looking at them, and as the mastery starts to show up, because it does, when you're really looking, you see it. It's now, okay, what's our next step to guide them with? And so we do that starting from the early years. And it starts to take more concrete form once they're in high school, because that's when they're really focused on this creation aspect. And so you start saying, like, you're creating, but you're not creating from something you've made before. You could have built incredible organizations in past lives, that, big movements in past lives. But what are you going to do now in this life? That's new, right? So it's recognizing that we have really big beings coming here who have done incredible things in the past, who are masters at what they do. But they have a responsibility with each life that they come down as well, that they're here to expand and evolve themselves. And so how do we support them in doing that?
When we're talking about coming in with the mastery, I just think of the children that are like savants with music at a very young age,
Yes.
that can sit behind a piano. And if you dive into like astrology or human design or other kind of archetypal work, it's interesting because that's where you start getting into like North Node, South Node, where your South Node is like your mastery from the previous lives. But then it's like, what are you here to move into now and evolve into now? And I love that you're observing that in these children and going, okay, like we can see what they're really, really good at and what they're coming in very skilled at. What's next? How do we now take this and mine for the other gold that they've come in to master in this lifetime, which is so incredibly important. In our last conversation, we had been talking kind of about the structure of Holos and like the age that the children come in, and then how they guide through the curriculum. Because at one point, you go from being more intentionally guided to being self-led within your curriculum, which I thought was beautiful.
A big piece of the foundation for Holos is self-study, allowing them giving them multiple opportunities to engage with the world around them so that they could discover more about themselves. The more, like you said, if you have all the books around you, then that's how you realize, I like to read, or I can read, and I'm really into this, and that's the idea. The more that you can expose them to guided exposure, the more that they can interact and the more they discover about themselves. So it's this beautiful journey that can start at any age. That's why we see you can start. She does that now. Like if I give her different toys, how she interacts with it, she starts to know how to use things, quickly. Right now she's pulling my hair. She really so she gets my attention. So I mean, it's quite amazing. Just following that model through all the ages. So we have a metaphysical curriculum that sets the framework, I would say, for Holos. And the metaphysical curriculum is based on concepts that activate the expansion of a being. It can start with experiences that you prepare for children, but when you start going into the older years, it becomes more of a philosophical conversation. So metaphysics, is the study of our reality. So it starts looking at, now you've experienced these these things through activities, lessons, projects, whatever it is through the younger years. Now that we're going older years, let's have these conversations in more depth, because by then it's already activated those aspects within them. So that's the metaphysics. And we look at, like, just for this year, for example, we built out the first few modules, which were, perception and perspective. And so perception and perspective, we do this with as young as 4 years old through different activities, but they also put together a play based on a situation that happened in the classroom. So in one of the, or not classroom, but in our pod room, and in one of the spaces, 2 children had the exact same toy. So one of them brought it in one day and he said, this is the name of my stuffy. And the other child said, because they have that stuffy too, no, that's not the name. It's actually this name. And they're both going back and forth because they had the same stuffy, different names, but they didn't realize that it was 2 different stuffies. And so they had this kind of conflict going back and forth. And that was the inspiration for play on perception and perspective. And so Geneviève, who does our, she writes all of our, well, she's embodiment through performing arts. That's what her mastery is to embody the concept. She created a play on perception perspective for them so they could perform it through music, through words, through action, and they could embody what it is to have a different perception, how to open up our perspective on a topic. And it was incredible because they ended up presenting this as a play, and at the end they were like, oh, it's different toys, and we just need to have a broader perspective. And it was beautiful. It's like a 10-minute play, but they worked on it for so many months to produce this final piece and embody that concept. And then we also looked at courage. We looked at this with parents too, and courage with a capital C. There's this coming from the heart space that it's being asked of us right now. And it's asking us to come from the heart space and do you have the courage to be truly you? Do you have the courage to see that you are not perhaps what everyone told you are, right? Like you were mentioning before. If you don't know who you are, the world will tell you who you are. It's that idea. So do you have the courage now to be you? And for many, it's like, I don't know what that's like. And so it's this journey of introspection and self-study for parents. And then for children, it's more of that freedom of expression. So the sharing circles, for example, be you, share what's inside of you, and how do we bring that into the older years is the same idea. We go into creating experiences, but then after, once they get into more high school years, it's about having those conversations now that's already part of their experience. So that's more of the metaphysical foundation. And so there's many modules that are going to go into that. And really it's this activation of their being, letting them be themselves, right, as they go through. And then the academics, because I think a lot of people, you just do metaphysics, but no, we do academics. It's more of, so my role in curriculum design is looking at the skill continuum, starting from, let's say, age 3 all the way to grade 12. So I'll look at numeracy and literacy foundations of what they say across many curriculums, like what is like skill progression, I would say. What is the most basic skill in reading and writing, and how does that go all the way up to grade 12? I don't keep the containers of age or grade, but I have the skill development. And so almost like the staircase or like upward line. And so what we do is we see where the child is at. And then when they show readiness to progress through their interaction. So as long as you keep the environment still stimulating and changing, and you see how they interact with it, then you start to guide them through the skill acquisition on that continuum. So for example, if you had come in kindergarten and you're at a grade demonstrating grade 3 reading, then we would start there, and then we would be like, okay, now what is our next step after that? Now, if you're in a class of 30 kids, that can be really difficult, and it affects social dynamics. Like, I totally understand that, but that's why I see this new model having lower ratios. So that's why we have lower ratios, especially with the little ones, like 4 or 5 years old. We are now doing like 5-to-1 ratio, just to be able to really work with them the way we want to. That one-on-one time is really important.
Well, it's so incredibly important because that also forms like our early attachment theories as well, is that ability to have that one-to-one connection, recognition, support Like we need that. And some of my biggest traumas that I've had to unpack as an adult came through the public schooling system and being seen as a problem. Because in that container of 30, when you're standing out, you become the problem. And it's interesting because it's happened kind of in society as well. When you have the courage to be different and to stand out, you're automatically labeled as the problem and the disruptor because you're not keeping the quote unquote peace, even though what we believe is peace is usually disharmony and not healthy at all. What I find so interesting about what you're doing in the upper grades as well, it was coming up a lot through the pandemic. So, in the work that I was doing throughout COVID, where a lot of parents were not okay with what was happening in public education, there were a lot of educators that were also choosing to exit the public education system. And then they're like, well, now what? What do we do? Where do we go? How do we move these children into new containers and spaces where they can learn freely, maintain their sovereignty and their autonomy? But one of the concerns moving forward was also, well, post secondary. How do we now move them into university should they want to go there? And I remember having conversations at the time going, well, I mean, you really have to look at what it is that the your kid wants to do. But if they're thinking more of like trade school, if they want to work with their hands or they want to be more creative, why do they need a post-secondary at that point? Why are they not looking perhaps at mentorship opportunities where you can go and you can apprentice and you can learn hands-on with someone who's already in the industry and someone who's already creating and doing what it is that you want to do, like that reliance on that additional certification. But that's not true for all people. Like some people do see other areas that they want to reach into that might require certifications and additional post-secondary education. So how does that work with the Holos model? And when you hit high school inside of your curriculum, what's next for them?
Yeah. So there's two different stages when it comes to high school. So it's the children right now, let's say entering Holos at a high school level or upper grades elementary, and then it's going to be those who go through the whole process. Two different situations. So right now, when I have children who come into the older grades or who are going to go through high school here, I take a more a general, I don't want to say general approach, but this approach of the homeschooling approach, I would say. So if you are studying what you enjoy, you have this freedom to do these apprenticeships, to do these internships, to guide your own experience. And if you see that you might need university, I mean, there's all you have to do as a homeschooler to apply to university is you have to do prerequisite courses. And it's usually like maybe 2 or 3 at most, if that's for like something like engineering or architecture or a science degree. You need 2 or 3 prerequisites in grade 12 that you can do online and still guided. So the whole high school career can still be done in a very flexible way, tailored to how you want to structure your day and your week and your year. It doesn't have to run from September to June. It could be that you're doing more intensive stuff in an internship abroad during the summer. I mean, the possibilities are limitless, which is what I love. And it's really about creating that for them. You're really curating their experience for them. So I look at it individually with each child and each family that comes in. What is it that you are? What are you interested in? What are your expectations for you? Like there's so much still from the old that you have to consider as you have these conversations. Like what are your beliefs? What are your expectations? You have to talk still with families. Like what are your expectations of the child? Like a lot of that is still part of those conversations. And so, yeah, it's like working with that whole family unit. And that's what we do. And so they already start those independent skills. Because I didn't get to answer this to you before. In homeschooling, you start in about grade 5. So you have this guided foundations up until grade 4 or till that age where that skill development would be, let's say. So reading, writing, numeracy up to a certain level. And then they start more independent exploration, I would say, and it usually happens around like 9, 10, 11. It really depends on each child. So they start to pick, oh, I really want to explore this. Great, let's do that, because they already have the foundations. They can go pick up a book and they can read about it and they can write about it. So that's why we wait until those foundations are put in place, and then they start exploring what they want to do. and they absorb and retain. And when parents are worried about retention, I mean, that they're going to retain so much more when they're leading it. So when we talk about child-led education, that's what we mean, is that they are guiding now, self-guiding themselves. It doesn't mean that, they come into school at 4 years old and they're just running free, like chaotic kind of energy, because I think sometimes there's this misunderstanding about what this is.
It's interesting where we believe that right now as a society where we're choosing to give children full autonomy over their decision making, and then where we're still saying, well, you can't decide how you learn. And it's interesting. So I think what you're building right now is coming at it's very timely that you're now moving into this paradigm of self-led education, guided, but still self-led, because I think people are open to receiving and hearing from their children and actually paying attention to the direction that they want to move in.
Yeah, I agree. And what I see too is a lot of amazing homeschooling groups that have been doing this since before the pandemic. And so they're great resources too if the parent is just homeschooling a high school student and kind of lost of how to do that. There's people who've been doing it, and it just shows that these kids become not just successful, sometimes even more so, because they don't understand what it is to be put in a box. They don't understand what a box is. They already grow up outside of the box. And so they have this amazing ability to be creative and innovative. And that's what a lot of, if you're getting hired, let's say you're not working the entrepreneurial path, but how it was before, that was a huge asset for a lot of places. But now that's another piece. We're moving more into an entrepreneurial time. And that's because what I see is these children have their mastery. They know why they're here. They know why they're coming. So how do we set them up to be their own leaders, how to be self-sufficient, and to not depend on the system. Absolutely. Right? But to also be financially set and stable and ready.
Yeah. And I think that's beautiful, because what you're doing right now by catering to a high school audience and also this kindergarten audience is you're straddling the line of bridging the old and the new while also creating the new. So you're going to see that evolution just through your students of watching this new paradigm really be birthed into being, and this new way of doing business as we move into a creator economy, which is just beautiful.
It is beautiful.
So beautiful. So if somebody is interested in Holos, if they're hearing what you're saying and they're like, oh my God, she's speaking to my soul, and maybe they have children now, or maybe they don't, maybe they're an educator and they're just curious about what you're doing. Where is Holos available at the moment?
Holos, well, we have our main location in Thornhill, Ontario. So it's just north of North York, I'd say. We were forming outside locations before, but right now our primary focus is to build a really stable model out of one location, so that in 3 years, that's our goal, is to be able to offer this in more locations and make it a co-collaborative, co-creative process with others who are deeply aligned with what we do. This just comes from my experience working and forming homeschooling pods in the last 3 years, that it's really important to build a model that's going to be sustainable and not just as a reaction to what's going on, but as a response to this time and thinking thousands of years ahead. And so it really requires us to work with precision and build this stability. Really, that's what it comes down to. So
I'm glad you said that, because I think we've seen a lot of escape hatches built, but not necessarily something that's sustaining. Like, we're just trying to get out of something, but not necessarily thinking, like you said, 1,000 years in the future and what that looks like.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of people too through this have realized, like, oh, maybe I want to start a school, or I want to start a pod. And I think that's really great. And it's kind of like now looking at yourself and what am I here to offer through this school and through this pod. We have something very unique. I think everybody, it's I wouldn't say we can all put all of these schools and alternative schools under the same umbrella. Like everybody is offering something. They're here to offer a piece of themselves, let's say.
Absolutely.
Yeah. If it's a parent and, you're interested, we have an online community. So it's not like, even if we are at a further distance for the next 3 years, but you really are into the self-study piece and the Guidesium and exploring metaphysical concepts, especially the one that you had brought up, this world as a mirror, is huge right now. Like anything that we see in discordance in our reality is because it's in discordance within us. And that's really tough to hear sometimes, and not easy, because you realize like, oh, I have a problem with that, but that's because the problem is in me and I have to now deal with that if I want to see it resolved out there. Like it's huge levels of accountability that we have to take. And if you're interested in being part of a community who each of us are taking accountability, but yet we're doing it together, then I do offer like support all year long. So it's workshops with monthly support throughout the year, and that's available to teachers who want to become guides, and that's also available for parents too. So that at least what I see is that we are working on ourselves and harmonizing our own home environments as a first step.
I think that's beautiful, and you're making it accessible to educators that are also in the public system, and just giving them like another lens in which they can view their reality. If they wanted to join your community, it will fundamentally change how they show up in the classroom. And like you said, like every kid remembers like that unicorn teacher that just didn't quite fit in and touched them in a very deep and meaningful way. And I think that's beautiful, because it just takes curiosity and a desire to want to learn. That's really all it is just following that curiosity. And so I love that you have that available to be able to reach people where they're at right now and allow them to decide the pace and readiness of the journey inward.
It's a beautiful project. I'm just really happy to continue to meet, others who hear it and want to collaborate and want to expand on it and work together. I'm just looking at all of us kind of at the beginning stages of this building, and it's like there's all this potential ahead of us, right? There's so much that we can do, we can make, and it's just really cool when you start seeing it take form.
Absolutely. And I think it just further confirms and affirms that when you place your attention in the areas that bring you joy and bring you peace, your created reality just shifts in an instant, and it begins to, like, your world just starts to take form around those feelings. And the more we embody that, the quicker the external realities begin to change. And it's an inside out job. So we're all responsible. Like you said, we're all responsible for doing our own part and just creating that ripple around us. It's that, as corny as it may sound, it's like you have to be the change you want to see. And you're doing that, and you are displaying that so beautifully. And I'm so grateful that we were able to meet, and that I'm able to witness Holos and the journey that you're on right now. I'm very excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thanks for, welcoming me on the call and being able to express it and share it with you and others. That means a lot for me. That's part of, big reason why I'm here too, is to continue to share this as much as I can.
Beautiful. And I will make sure that all of your information is in the show notes, and that anyone who is curious about Holos Academe and what you do and who you be, that they can find that and follow up with you directly.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Nicole.
You're welcome. It's one thing to have and hold a vision of what a new education system could look like, but to extract from within the courage and fortitude to take action on that vision and birth it into being is incredibly rare. I always feel so honored and blessed when men and women cross my path who dare to dream out loud and take the inspired action that moves humanity forward. So, whether you are a parent who is seeking alternatives to education, a teacher who wishes to exit the current system, or if you've been completely inspired by the Holos model and want to know how you can create something similar in your own community, I highly recommend that you reach out to Stephanie. She's not only a pleasure and a joy to have a conversation with, but she is a wealth of information and on a mission to not only preserve, but cultivate and amplify the innate creative knowingness that we enter this world with. Thank you so much for being here. Until next time, I love you.